the Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.
Financial Survival Network is presented to you by Regal Assets. Buy and sell physical gold and silver through your existing retirement plan, 100% tax-free with Regal Assets. If you want to include physical gold or silver in your existing IRA or old 401k, request your free investment kit, which was recently featured in the Forbes and Smart Money Wall Street Journal magazines. Call toll-free 855-678-6620, 855-678-6620, or visit regalassets.com. You're listening to the FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. I'm Kerry Lutz on 1490 WGCH. With us now is Martin Armstrong. He seems to think that what we're going through now in Europe, while very serious, is paralleling the panic of 1837 that we went through in the United States when President Andrew Jackson attacked the Second Bank of the United States and eventually put it out of business. Martin, welcome back.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Hey, so what we're really going through here is just kind of a repeat where all of these states in the U.S. defaulted, and now we've got the states of Europe who are going to do the same thing?
Pretty much. There's a high probability you'll first see like devaluations of Southern Europe, because the politicians they don't really understand what they're doing. When
surprise,
when they first formed the euro, they actually came to our conferences and stuff and explained that you couldn't possibly create a single currency without a single debt. They understood that. But they said, well, we're going to do the currency first, and then phase two, we'll talk about the debt, because they felt that they couldn't sell that at the time. And the problem is those politicians leave, another group comes in, and they forget all about phase two, and everybody's shocked. Oh my God, it's not working. What happened? But essentially, what the bottom line was that when the euro first developed, it was trading and went down to about 80 cents U.S. Then it went up to $1.60 U.S. So you can imagine if whatever you owed, you borrowed, it now doubled in cost. Mm-hmm. So they were extracting tremendous amounts of capital out of Southern Europe, and these people didn't understand what was going on. And so it's not just the spending that a lot of people in the newspapers blame them for. What their spending was nothing extraordinarily out of line with all the other countries. It's just that their debt in real terms doubled in value. And so they had to pay that off. And so I think what you're going to see is they're beginning to realize that, and you're probably going to see devaluations of debt coming out of Southern Europe to try and still hold the euro together rather than create things. But the parallel is really very similar to what the United States went through after the panic of 1837. And most people have heard of Jackson's war on the banks, etc., and that he destroyed the central bank, and a lot of people that don't like the Fed, cheer that. But the consequences of what really happened, he shifted the deposits of the United States to state banks. And that then made people think the state banks were safe. So the money now shifted all to the state banks. And all these state legislatures were giving charters out, like candy. And some banks were setting up in remote places that people couldn't even get to. Now the bank could issue paper money, and so you can go to Amazon and you can get a book, Broken Banknotes of the 1830s and 40s, and you had thousands of banks issuing paper currency that was circulating around the country, and people couldn't tell if one was good or one was bad. And So eventually you end up with a panic of 1837 when Jackson left office. And everything starts crashing at that point. But then what happens is states now start issuing bonds trying to bail out the banks, just like we went through again here. And then about 12 states ended up going into default, 5 of which never paid anything back and repudiated everything that they ever borrowed.
Wow.
So it's similar to Europe in the sense where we had one currency, all these banks issuing dollars, but you had all kinds of different states running different types of schemes and budgets and whatever, and it just didn't work. And we ended up having to, in 1861, we came out with federal currency, which we've had ever since, and state banks are no longer allowed to issue money. So this is largely what I think is a lesson for Europe, that you just, if you weren't going to consolidate the debt, it's just not going to work, period.
Mm-hmm.
And but politicians are very thick-headed, and I think our real issue that people should be concerned about is that right now you have a lot of capital that's been pushing into the U.S. because of the turmoil in Europe. And the same thing in Japan. Japan, a lot of capital has come this way, largely because they've suddenly discovered they have national security problems with China, after some islands, and Russia, etc. So that's why the Dow has been pushing up. And the dollar has risen almost to like 15% against the yen, and it will continue to rise even against the euro. The only thing that the euro is being held together with bubble gum and string at this point is because everybody's kind of waiting for the German elections in September. And if Merkel loses, I don't know what's going to be left, but effectively you have Germany trying to do austerity, France, which is basically saying to hell with everything and just trying to tax everybody in sight and not reform and cut expenditures at all. The Economist put out a piece, questioning what the Italian elections did, saying that, they don't, not looking at reality, but honestly, I think the Italians got it right. You either honor all the bonds and you're transferring all the wealth to the bondholders at the expense of the people that are working, and that is just creating civil unrest and economic decline.
Right.
Honestly, we should not. It should be against the law for government to borrow money, period.
So what are we looking at? The only way out here, in my mind, and I've been saying it for a while, I'm not unique, I'm not a brilliant thinker, is basically a debt jubilee, but at that point we need a new banking system and a new monetary system all at the same time. But it's going to be some type of debt forgiveness scheme that eventually leads the world out of this, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, you always end up with a default in government debt. In fact, I hope to come out with a book on this before year end, but Adam Smith in his Wealth of Nations in his chapter on public debt, he basically just mentions in passing, I don't know why anybody considers that government debt to be quality, because nobody ever pays.
Hey, I have a title for your book too. I've got a great title. Instead of The Wealth of Nations, you should name it The Debt of Nations.
That's probably, I might do that.
Come on, that is a great title.
Because he wrote that in 1776, and honestly, nothing has changed ever since.
Except the quality's gotten worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I don't really, find anybody that can explain to me what's going on, because if you take the national debt, about 70% of it is a cumulative paid out interest. Mm-hmm. So it's not this, we're taking money from the rich to help the poor. It's going from the productive class, and it's paying the bondholders. And 40% of them aren't even in the country. So I don't really understand what's going on. Plus, you're borrowing money with no intention of ever paying anything back. So if interest rates go to 20%, now we're going to have to pay 20% on everything that we've issued before. I mean, the whole system is just destined to fail.
Was it designed to fail? I mean, is it just human nature that government debt always winds up getting abused? Initially, they say, we're only going to do it in an emergency when we absolutely have to raise money and there's no other way. And then somehow it becomes the normal course of business where you start borrowing and borrowing just to pay current expenses, and everything is an emergency.
Well, historically, and we are still clinging to this idea a little bit, government had no right to tax the people. The people had to consent to being taxed. And the only reason to be taxed was for national defense, period. Mm-hmm. So the king would have to then summon Parliament to get the right to tax the people. So that's why there was the long Parliament and the dispute that developed with Charles I, and they eventually beheaded him, etc. But the only reason he had to call Parliament was to get the right to tax. Mm-hmm. Now, we still actually have that. Obama cannot tax the people unilaterally. He has to submit it to Congress, and Congress has to agree to it. Congress is supposed to be representing us, but of course they don't. And it's really all self-interest down there in Washington anyhow.
Yeah.
So, but in theory, we're still clinging to this idea that no taxation without representation, but we lost our representation a long time ago. So there is no divine right of government to tax anybody for anything, period. Historically, a king could only raise taxes when it was to defend the country, and not even to wage war.
Right.
So the first tax to wage war was for the Crusades, and it was sold to the public, well, this is God's war. You're doing it for God.
Right.
And so he got them to agree to be taxed to pay for the Crusades. Mm-hmm. So before that, it's just never any instance of, gee, I want to go invade France. I'm going to tax you to go do that. What are you talking about? You can't do that.
Right.
So, that's the historical background to all this stuff.
If you want to hear the rest of this extended interview with Martin Armstrong, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com, click the link, and sign up now.